Names and details have been changed, but the records are real. My brother stood in the center aisle like he owned the air, smiling wide, and he turned my grief into a punchline in front of strangers. The auditorium lights were bright enough to wash the color out of everyone's faces. I heard the dry rasp of programs and the soft squeak of shoes on polished floor. He leaned toward the row behind me and said, "She always needs attention," loud enough for a few people to laugh on reflex. The laugh felt automatic, like a door closing. I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on the stage and my hands folded, the way you do when you're trying not to spill anything. In my coat pocket, my father's pocket watch sat cold and heavy, like a promise I didn't have to announce. My brother mistook my quiet for weakness, because he always has. The truth was, I'd already seen what he was trying to do. I had the screenshot, the emails, and a plan that didn't require raising my voice. When he reached for the front row, someone in full dress uniform stepped between us, and the room went still in a way that felt official. Not loud, not rude, just final in a language he couldn't interrupt. I stayed calm, and I let time, like my father's watch, bring the right moment forward. Waiting was a skill I learned early, in a house where silence had a job and voices had consequences. My brother was the golden storyteller, bright in public, cutting in private. He could charm a room, borrow a spotlight, and leave everyone thanking him for it, then later use that same charm as a shield. At home, his jokes came with an edge, and his stories always placed him at the center, with the rest of us arranged like furniture. I became the fixer, and my mother became the peacekeeper. I made appointments, filled out forms, remembered birthdays, and quietly replaced what got broken, because I learned peace was easier to maintain than to rebuild. My mother could be warm, tea on the stove, clean towels, a hand on your shoulder, but she practiced a strategic silence too. When my brother crossed a line, she would touch my wrist and murmur, "Let it go, just for today." That today became a rule we lived under. In the family group chat, my brother's words were always the loudest, and my mother's replies the shortest. I learned to keep my own voice low until I could support it in writing with something stronger than emotion. After my dad died, the house felt colder, like the heat never fully returned. At the memorial, my brother told a long story that made everyone laugh, and when the laughter ended, I realized he had slipped into the role of spokesperson without asking anyone. I stood in the hallway afterward, the air sharp with winter and florist lilies, while my mother stared at the floor like she was trying to disappear. In my pocket was my dad's pocket watch, the one he set beside envelopes when he paid bills, and I pressed my thumb over its ridged lid and listened to its small click. The metal was cold at first, then warmed as my hand held on fully. Dad used to press that watch into my palm and say, "Read the due date, then read it again." That was his discipline, quiet, warm, factual. Here's what I learned from it. Time records what people try to rewrite. It doesn't rush or argue, it just keeps moving, faithful to what happened. When I forget myself, I touch the watch and remember that truth doesn't need volume. And my brother had been rewriting us for years, until he finally left proof. 2 nights before the ceremony, he made the mistake of putting his story where screenshots could catch it. My apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes the refrigerator hum sound loud. The only light came from my phone's screen, cold blue on my hands. My phone buzzed with a message from a woman who used to organize events with my dad. She wrote, "Is this real?" and attached a screenshot. My brother had posted a glossy photo of himself in a suit beside my dad's framed portrait, saying he was representing the family at the base ceremony. In the comments, he answered questions like he had authority to give it, and he hinted at special access with a wink that made my stomach tighten. Someone even asked if he could reserve seats, and he replied as if that were normal. I clicked the link and scrolled. There were real donations from people who genuinely cared, mixed with comments that treated the whole thing like a social club. The page listed a vague purpose with no clear contact information, and it used a memorial photo my brother didn't have permission to post. My hands went cold on the phone, but my mind got strangely clear. This wasn't a feeling, it was a record, time-stamped, public, and tied to an official program where my name was already listed as next of kin. I stopped reacting, and I started building a file that could speak even if I stayed silent. I took screenshots, saved URLs, and wrote down the exact time I saw everything. Then I opened the ceremony email and confirmed my name was already listed. The next morning, the air outside my building had that sharp winter bite that makes you breathe slower, and I used that cold as a cue to stay clear and careful. I walked back inside, made coffee, and opened my laptop like I was clocking in for a job, not a family emergency. I saved the post, the link, the comments, the timestamps, and a screen recording in case anything disappeared later. And I labeled each file with the date so it would read like a log instead of a rant. Then I wrote a simple timeline, event, date, time, so my memory wouldn't have to work harder than my documents, and I named the folder something boring on purpose. Ceremony Admin, the same kind of plain label my father used on his envelopes. Next, I emailed the event protocol office from the address they already had on file and used the same calm tone they use with everyone. I attached the screenshot and asked for two things in writing: the credential policy and the seating list for the family section, including who was authorized for the front row, what identification was required at the door, and how last-minute changes were handled in writing. I kept the subject line neutral, question Ray, authorized family representative, because neutral language invites neutral answers and slows down assumptions. While I waited, I submitted a report through the donation platform's official support form, requested a temporary pause pending verification, and asked what documentation they would need if a deceased person's name or image had been used without clear permission. I also messaged the organization mentioned on the page to ask if the fundraiser had been approved, knowing that silence can be an answer too, and I saved every confirmation number the system gave me. An hour later, a calm reply arrived from Protocol. "Thank you for reaching out. We will verify your family's authorized representatives." I read it twice, printed it, and slipped it into my folder, because paper doesn't vanish when a post gets deleted and it's harder to argue with ink. The printer's steady click made the situation feel measurable instead of messy, which is exactly what I needed. That afternoon, I met with the estate attorney who had helped my mother update her documents months earlier, and his office had fluorescent light and that quiet hum that makes you focus. He kept me on process: one authorized contact, written consent for representation, communication in a single channel, and a verification template so my words would stay clean. Before I left, I called my mother and told her, gently, what I had documented, and she only asked if I was safe, as if she could finally hear the difference between volume and seriousness. I prepared for the ceremony like it was a contract, not a confrontation. I confirmed my credential instructions, printed every email, and organized them in a clear folder with tabs I could flip through without fumbling. I drafted one short statement for Protocol in case I had to clarify anything, and I kept it factual and brief, the way my father would have wanted. I packed small, practical things: water, tissues, a pen, charged my phone fully, set my car keys by the door, and wrote the Protocol office number on a sticky note, because preparation is calmer than memory when you're under stress. On the ride to the base, the heater clicked on and off, and I held my father's pocket watch in my palm until the cold metal warmed, promising myself I would let procedure speak first when I arrived and save my voice for what mattered most. At the gate, the barrier arm lifted with a quiet mechanical sigh, and I drove onto the base like I was entering a different kind of world. The guard checked my ID, glanced at my name, and gave a small nod that felt like permission, not approval. Everything beyond the gate looked arranged by rule, clean sidewalks, clipped grass, signs that spoke in simple directives. I felt the pocket watch in my coat, cold against my fingers, and I let that cold remind me to stay exact. Inside the auditorium, the lighting was bright and cool, and the sound carried in a controlled echo. People spoke in low voices, the way they do when the room itself expects restraint. I took my seat in the family section and rested my folder on my lap like a shield made of paper. A Protocol table sat near the aisle with clipboards lined up in a neat row, and just seeing it steadied me, because clipboards don't respond to charm. Here's what I did next. I stopped scanning for threats and started scanning for process. My brother arrived early, loud in a room that didn't reward loud. He shook hands as if he were collecting witnesses, then angled toward the front row with his grin already practiced. An aide stepped into his path, calm as a closed door, and said, "May I see your credentials, sir?" My brother laughed and tried to turn it into a joke, then tried to make it into a story, but the aide didn't argue. He waited. My brother patted his pockets, produced nothing official, and kept talking anyway, as if words could substitute for an ID card. The aide pointed to the clipboard and the small sign that read verification, and I watched my brother's confidence leak out in little pauses. Then the room shifted, not from volume, but from presence, as a 4-star general entered, and the murmurs fell away like a light dimming. When the program reached my father's name, the general spoke about service without embellishment, and he paused long enough for silence to become respect. His gaze moved to the family section as if he'd been briefed, and when he met my eyes, he nodded once and said, "Ma'am, this way." An officer lifted the aisle rope and guided me forward. The pocket watch went cold for a second and then warm as my fingers closed around it. At the front, they seated me in the place reserved for next of kin, adjusting the program without announcing anyone else's mistake. No one raised a voice, but the message was unmistakable. Authority reads the record, follows procedure, and lets the truth stand without shouting. When the ceremony ended, the paperwork kept moving. Outside the auditorium, the hallway sounded different, more footsteps, more breath, the soft scrape of chairs being folded and stacked. My brother tried to catch me near the exit, but he couldn't find a stage to stand on. His words came fast, then stalled when an officer remained nearby, quietly attentive. The absence of drama was its own kind of consequence. By evening, I had 2 messages that mattered more than any argument. One was from protocol, confirming the authorized list had been followed exactly as written. The other was from the donation platform, acknowledging the report and placing the page under review pending verification. No accusations, no speeches. Just documented steps being completed by people whose job was to be neutral. Here's what I did next. I saved the emails, printed them, and slid them into the folder, because closure should be traceable. In the days that followed, the outcomes arrived in practical packaging. The fundraiser link stopped working, and the photo came down. A relative called to check in and then slid into accusation, careful and quiet. Was all that necessary? I answered with the same calm I used in my emails. This wasn't about humiliating anyone. It was about protecting my father's name and the people who gave in good faith. If someone felt embarrassed, it wasn't because I raised my voice. It was because a record can't be negotiated with. That night, I set the pocket watch on my table, and I chose my next step to be warm, not rushed. The next morning, sunlight came through my kitchen window in a soft stripe, and the kettle clicked as it heated, ordinary sounds that felt like permission to be ordinary again. I didn't wake up triumphant. I woke up clear, which is quieter and more useful. I called my mother later, when I could speak slowly. I didn't give her a performance. I gave her the facts, and then I gave her space to feel them. After a long breath, she said, "I'm proud of you," and the words landed gently, like a blanket placed over shoulders that had been cold for too long. Here's what I did next. I stopped managing other people's comfort as if it were my job. I rebuilt my routine around choices I could keep. I blocked my brother where I needed to, and where contact was unavoidable, I moved it to email, 1 thread, 1 subject line, 1 record. I stopped volunteering as the family's emergency responder and started giving my time to things that warmed me back up. Longer walks, a weekend class, a small volunteer shift that asked for my hands, not my history. The pocket watch moved from my pocket to my desk, not as a weapon, not as a warning, but as a ritual. When I feel myself shrinking, I close it, feel the click, and remember. I can choose silence without disappearing, and I can use my voice without begging anyone to hear it. Weeks later, I still hear his laughter sometimes, but I hear the general's calm more clearly. "Ma'am, this way." If you've lived with someone who makes you doubt your own reality, I want you to know this. Your steadiness is not weakness. Quiet power is not silence that surrenders. It's silence that chooses its moment. Here's S. What I hope you take from my story. Document what matters, screenshots, dates, confirmations, and clean timelines. Let procedure carry the weight when your voice feels tired. And if you've been labeled difficult for asking for honesty, you are not alone. If you feel safe sharing, tell me in the comments what boundary finally changed your life, or what you wish you had put in writing sooner. Your words might become someone else's warm light. And if you want more quiet power stories, where justice looks like receipts, protocol, and peace, please subscribe and stay with me. Until next time, keep your receipts and keep your peace.